March 23, 1945, 1400 hours. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, Forward Command Post, Reims, France. The palace is quiet in the way only command centers get quiet during war. Not peaceful, never peaceful, but controlled, organized. Every sound has purpose. The rustle of maps being unfolded, the scratch of pens on casualty reports, the low murmur of staff officers coordinating the advance across Europe. Dwight Eisenhower sits at his desk, reviewing the morning's reports from the Rhine crossing operations. 3rd Army, 7th Army, 1st Army, all moving east, all pushing deeper into Germany. The numbers blur together after a while. Casualties, kilometers gained, bridges secured, towns liberated. He rubs his eyes, lights another cigarette. The ashtray is already half full. Walter Bedell Smith stands beside him, pointing to position markers on a large situation map mounted on the wall. Red pins for Allied positions, blue for confirmed German positions, grey for contested ground. The map is a mosaic of advance and resistance, progress and cost. The afternoon light filters through the tall windows. Everything is as it should be, methodical, professional. The machinery of modern warfare operating at peak efficiency. Then the door opens. No knock, just opens. George Patton walks in. Eisenhower looks up from the casualty reports. His pen stops mid-notation. He stares. Bedell Smith freezes mid-sentence, finger still pointing at a map coordinate. Patton's uniform is covered in dried mud, caked on his boots, splattered up his legs to the knees, streaked across his chest and shoulders. There's a line of dirt across his face where he must have wiped sweat with a muddy hand. His helmet is tucked under his arm, also muddy. He's grinning like a schoolboy who just won a fistfight. Eisenhower sets down his pen very carefully, very slowly. "George," he says, "why are you covered in mud?" The grin gets wider. "Because I just crossed the Rhine in a tank, Ike. Led the assault myself. Somebody had to show those kids how it's done." The room goes absolutely silent. Even the distant typewriter clacking from the outer offices seems to stop. Bedell Smith's hand slowly drops from the map. Eisenhower stands up, not quickly, deliberately. He walks around his desk to face Patton directly. "You're 60 years old," he says slowly. "You're an army commander, and you were in a tank, under fire." "Damn right I was." The words hang in the air like smoke. Eisenhower doesn't move, doesn't speak. He just looks at his old friend, this impossible, infuriating, brilliant man standing in his office, covered in mud from a river crossing 200 miles away. Bedell Smith clears his throat. "Sir, I'll get the 3rd Army situation reports from this morning." He moves toward the door, grateful perhaps for an excuse to leave. "All of them, Beetle," Eisenhower says without taking his eyes off Patton. "Everything from 0500 onward." The door closes. They're alone now. Two men who've known each other for decades. Two completely different philosophies of command, standing face to face in a palace in France while the war grinds forward outside. "George," Eisenhower says quietly, "sit down." "I'm fine standing, Ike." "That wasn't a suggestion. Sit." Patton sits, still grinning, still covered in mud. Eisenhower remains standing, looking down at him. "Talk," Eisenhower says. "What the hell were you thinking?" According to the official 3rd Army after-action reports, archived at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, the Rhine crossing at Oppenheim began the night of March 22, 1945. 3rd Army's 12th Corps executed a surprise assault crossing with minimal artillery preparation. The element of surprise was complete. German resistance was lighter than expected. By dawn on March 23rd, a solid bridgehead was established on the east bank of the Rhine. But something unusual appears in the morning reports. General Patton's command post was listed as mobile, with no specific coordinates. His radio traffic went silent for approximately 6 hours, between 0500 and 1100 hours. 3rd Army's Chief of Staff, Major General Hobart Gay, reported Patton as temporarily out of communication to SHAEF headquarters. The reality was simpler and more shocking. Patton had climbed into an M4 Sherman tank with a company from the 4th Armored Division and crossed the Rhine with them. Not in a command half-track, safely behind the assault wave, not observing from the western bank, in a tank, in the assault wave, under German artillery fire. He was 200 yards from German defensive positions, directing tank movement, calling targets, leading, at age 60, commanding general of an entire army of 250,000 men. Bedell Smith returns with the reports. He spreads them on Eisenhower's desk without a word. The timeline becomes clear. Patton's last confirmed position was at the 12th Corps command post at 2200 hours on March 22nd. His next confirmed position was back at 3rd Army headquarters at 1200 hours on March 23rd. 6 hours, unaccounted for, unreachable, in the middle of a major river assault. Eisenhower studies the reports. His jaw tightens. When he speaks, his voice is controlled, dangerously controlled. George, explain to me why you were in a tank. You're an army commander. You command from a headquarters, with maps and radios and staff officers who keep track of where you are, so we can coordinate an entire theater of war. Patton leans forward. The grin fades slightly, replaced by intensity. The boys needed to see their commanding general wasn't afraid to cross with them, Ike. First time we've crossed a major river directly into Germany, the Rhine. That's not just any river. That's the barrier to the German heartland. That's the line they've held for 1,000 years. Somebody needed to show them it could be done, that we're not afraid, that their leadership stands with them. That's not your job, Eisenhower says flatly. Winning is my job. And soldiers win when they're inspired, when they believe. You inspire them from headquarters with grand strategy and coordination. I inspire them by being there, by showing them I'll go where I send them. That's how I've always done it. That's how 3rd Army operates. Bedell Smith speaks up carefully. Sir, your staff reported you out of communication for 6 hours. SHAFE regulations require Army commanders to maintain constant communication with higher headquarters. What if something had gone wrong with the crossing? What if we'd needed to coordinate with your flanking units? What if the Germans had counterattacked? Nobody knew where you were. Patton turns to him. Beetle, to hell with SHAFE regulations. We took the bridgehead, expanded it to 3 miles deep by noon. 0 casualties in the lead company I was with. 0. Because I was there to direct the movement personally, to point out targets, to keep the momentum going. That's what leaders do. Eisenhower walks to the window, looks out at the French countryside. Spring is coming, green pushing through the brown. Life reasserting itself even here, even now, even with war all around. When he speaks, his voice is still controlled, but there's an edge now. That's not what army commanders do, George. That's what company commanders do, maybe battalion commanders, but not generals with 3 stars who are responsible for an entire front, for coordination with other armies, for strategic objectives that go beyond one river crossing. Then maybe I'm not a typical 3-star general. Eisenhower turns around. No, you're not. And that's been the problem for 3 years now. The room goes quiet. Patton's expression shifts. The grin is completely gone. He stands up slowly. If you've got something to say to me, Ike, say it. And then Eisenhower says something that makes Patton realize this isn't just another reprimand. This is personal. This is about something deeper than tactics or regulations. According to Walter Bedell Smith's memoirs, published years later, Eisenhower's next words were delivered quietly, but with unmistakable emotion. George, you're 60 years old. You've had heart trouble. Your doctor told me personally that you're supposed to avoid extreme physical stress, and you got into a tank under artillery fire. What if you'd been killed? What happens to 3rd Army then? What happens to the entire southern advance into Germany? Patton meets his eyes, holds them. Then Manton Eddy takes command of 3rd Army and finishes the job. He's a good officer. 12th Corps would step up. The mission would continue. But I wasn't killed, Ike. We succeeded. And now every soldier in 3rd Army knows their commanding general will go where he sends them. That matters. That's worth the risk. You don't get to make that calculation anymore, George. You're too important, too visible. If something happens to you, it's not just a tactical problem. It's a strategic problem. It's a morale problem, across the entire European theatre. The press loves you. The soldiers love you. Hell, half of America knows your name. And if you get killed doing something reckless, something unnecessary, what message does that send? Since when do we fight wars based on public relations? Patton's voice rises. Since when does a general's safety matter more than the mission? Since that general became a symbol, Eisenhower's voice rises to match. Since his face is on every newspaper from California to Maine. Since soldiers from here to the Pacific know his name and follow his example. You're not just another field commander anymore, George. You're Patton. And Patton getting killed in a tank assault at age 60 would be a disaster for this army and this war effort. The words hang in the air. Bedell Smith looks uncomfortable. This has become something beyond a professional discussion. This is two men who've known each other for decades, who've commanded together through 2 years of brutal warfare, having an argument about something fundamental. Eisenhower's voice softens. He walks closer to Patton. George, I need you alive. I need you commanding. We're maybe 40 miles from Berlin. The Germans are collapsing. The war could be over in weeks, maybe days. Don't throw it all away because you need to prove you're still tough. Everyone knows you're tough. You proved that in North Africa, in Sicily, in France. You don't need to prove it anymore. Patton stands there, still covered in mud, looking at his old friend. When he speaks, his voice is quieter, but absolutely firm. With respect, Ike, yes, I do, every single day. Because the minute I stop leading from the front, the minute I start pushing pins in maps from a safe headquarters, I stop being Patton. I become just another general. And you need Patton right now. You need the general who makes Third Army move faster, fight harder, and win more consistently than any other army in this theatre. That general doesn't exist without being present with his men. He turns and walks toward the door, stops, looks back. I'll be at my headquarters if you need me. We're planning the drive toward Frankfurt. Should be there in 72 hours. He walks out, still trailing mud across the palace floor. The door closes behind him. Bedell Smith and Eisenhower stand in silence for a long moment. Finally, Smith speaks. Do you want me to issue a formal reprimand, sir? Eisenhower shakes his head slowly, walks back to his desk, sits down, lights another cigarette. What good would it do? George Patton doesn't follow regulations when they conflict with how he thinks wars should be fought. He never has. He never will. Then what do? We let him be Patton, and we hope to God he survives long enough to see Germany surrender. But this wasn't the first time. Eisenhower walks to his file cabinet, third drawer down, pulls out a folder marked Patton, George S., Command Issues. The folder is thick, very thick. He opens it, starts reading through incident reports dating back to 1943, each one a variation on the same theme. George Patton putting himself in danger, going where army commanders aren't supposed to go, doing things that violate every principle of modern command structure. Sicily, August 1943. Patton personally led a reconnaissance patrol into enemy-held territory near Palermo, took small arms fire, returned to his command post 4 hours later covered in dust, grinning, with tactical intelligence he'd gathered personally. His staff had been frantic. Nobody knew where he was. The incident was overshadowed a week later by the notorious slapping incident, and everyone forgot about the patrol. But Eisenhower didn't forget. He made a note in Patton's file. Exhibits persistent disregard for personal safety. Unable or unwilling to command from appropriate distance. Requires constant supervision. Normandy, July 1944. After Third Army became operational, Patton made a habit of visiting frontline units. Not behind the lines, not at division headquarters, at the actual front. Company command posts, battalion aid stations, anywhere soldiers were in contact with the enemy. His security detail objected constantly. His staff pleaded with him to stay back. Patton ignored them all. One report from a worried aide describes Patton standing on a tank turret, fully exposed, using binoculars to observe German positions less than 500 yards away. Mortar rounds were landing nearby. The aide tried to get him to take cover. Patton's response, recorded in the aide's diary, "How am I supposed to know what my soldiers are dealing with if I don't see it myself?" And now this, the Rhine crossing, at age 60, in a tank, under fire. Bedell Smith watches Eisenhower review the file. "He's not going to change, sir. This is who he is." "I know." Eisenhower closes the folder. That's the problem. And the solution. The next day, March 24th, Omar Bradley calls. Bradley commands 12th Army Group, Patton's direct superior in the chain of command. He's heard about the Rhine incident from multiple sources. He's not happy. "Ike, we need to talk about George." Eisenhower leans back in his chair, looks at the ceiling. "I figured you'd call. He was in a tank, at 60 years old, under fire. This is insane. You need to put a stop to this before he gets himself killed." "How exactly do I do that, Brad?" "Issue an order. Direct order. General Patton is hereby forbidden from forward positions during combat operations." "He'll ignore it." Bradley's voice is tight with frustration. "Then you relieve him. You relieve him before he throws away the most effective army commander we have, because he's got some personal need to play soldier." Or, Eisenhower says quietly, "I accept that one day, maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, I'm going to get a telegram saying George Patton was killed in action doing something brave and stupid, and Third Army will never be the same. Because Patton is Third Army. Without him, it's just another field army. Good units, competent officers, solid logistics. With him, it's the most effective striking force in Europe. You can't manufacture that. You can't replace it. And I can't let him throw it away on some need to prove his manhood at age 60. Bradley is quiet for a moment. "You're right about everything except one thing. If you don't stop him, if you just let him keep taking these risks, Third Army collapses anyway. The day we lose George Patton, and we will lose him, Ike. Not if, when. Men who command like that don't survive wars." "I know. Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest we let George be George, and we pray he survives long enough to take the surrender. Because the alternative is destroying what makes Third Army special by trying to protect the man who makes it special." Bradley isn't satisfied. "That's not a strategy, Ike. That's hoping for luck. It's the only option I have. You want to try ordering George Patton to stay safe? Be my guest. Let me know how that works out." The call ends. Eisenhower sits alone in his office, staring at Patton's file. The man is impossible, insubordinate, reckless, and absolutely irreplaceable. But Patton wasn't done. 2 days later, March 26th, Eisenhower receives another report. Patton has been touring forward positions again, riding in a jeep with minimal escort, driving within 3 miles of active combat zones, stopping to talk with company commanders, walking through towns that were German-occupied less than 24 hours earlier. One report describes Patton climbing onto a damaged German Panther tank to examine its armor. Engineers are still clearing mines from the area. His aide begs him to leave. Patton's response: "How am I supposed to understand German tank design if I don't examine their equipment?" And then Eisenhower discovers what Patton has been telling his division commanders: instructions that violate every principle of modern command structure. The orders are verbal, nothing in writing, but multiple sources confirm them. Division commanders, corps staff officers, even some of Patton's own aides speaking off the record. Lead from the front. Be visible to your men. Don't ask them to go anywhere you won't go first. I don't care what Schaeff says about appropriate command distances. I care about winning, and we win because our soldiers know their leaders stand with them. Eisenhower calls Bradley again. George is teaching his entire command structure to operate like he does. I know. We're creating an entire generation of generals who think command means being in tanks, getting shot at, taking the same risks as privates. That's not sustainable, Brad. That's not how modern warfare works. We can't run an army where every commander from corps level down thinks his job is to be John Wayne. Try telling that to George. Try telling that to Third Army. His methods work, Ike. They're insane. They violate every doctrine we've ever written, but they work. Neither man has an answer to that. The palace floors have been mopped. The physical evidence of that day is gone. But the question remains, hanging in the air between every conversation, every report, every update from Third Army's relentless advance. How do you command a man who doesn't believe in commanding from safety? How do you protect someone who doesn't want protection? How do you preserve the weapon you need most without destroying what makes it effective? Eisenhower doesn't have answers, only choices, all of them bad, all of them necessary. Outside, the war continues. Third Army pushes east, Frankfurt next, then Kassel, then deeper into Germany, racing toward an end that feels close now, close enough to taste. And somewhere at the head of that advance, George Patton rides in jeeps and climbs on tanks and stands where generals aren't supposed to stand. 60 years old, heart condition, 3 stars on his collar, still proving, still leading, still impossible. The question isn't whether he'll survive. The question is whether Eisenhower can afford to stop it. By early April 1945, the situation has escalated beyond individual incidents, beyond isolated reports of reckless behavior. This has become something more fundamental, a clash of philosophies that's been building since North Africa, since Sicily, since the first time George Patton decided that his rank didn't exempt him from danger. Third Army is racing across Germany now. Frankfurt falls on March 29th, then Kassel, then Gotha. The advance is relentless. German resistance is collapsing faster than intelligence predicted. Entire divisions surrendering, supply lines stretching thin, just trying to keep up with Patton's forward elements. And Patton is everywhere, in the advance, behind it, sometimes ahead of it. Eisenhower receives reports daily, sometimes twice daily, each one a variation on the same theme. April 2nd. Patton visits a battalion aid station 2 miles from the front, spends an hour talking to wounded men, promises them Germany will pay for every drop of blood. His security detail is beside themselves. There's still sporadic artillery fire in the area. April 5th. Patton's jeep is spotted entering a town the 4th Armored Division secured just 3 hours earlier. Building-to-building fighting ended 90 minutes before he arrived. His aides report notes, General Patton wanted to see the tactical situation personally before issuing orders for the next phase. April 7th. Engineers are building a pontoon bridge across the main river. Patton drives onto it while they're still working, tests the stability himself, tells the engineers it's good work. They're so stunned to see a 3-star general on an unfinished bridge under potential enemy observation that they barely remember to salute. Each incident alone might be overlooked, written off as eccentricity, the quirks of a successful commander. But together, they form a pattern, a consistent, deliberate pattern of behavior that defies everything the modern army teaches about command. And the most troubling part isn't what Patton does, it's what he's teaching others to do. April 8th, a report comes in from 3rd Corps. The Corps commander, Major General Manton Eddy, was seen at a company command post during an attack. Not at Corps headquarters, at a company CP, less than a mile from active fighting. When questioned, Eddy's response was simple. General Patton expects his commanders to know the ground. You can't know the ground from a map. April 9th, another report, this time from 12th Corps. The division commander of the 11th Armored Division personally led a reconnaissance element to identify river crossing points. Led them, didn't send them, led them. His justification. General Patton says you can't ask men to do what you won't do yourself. It's spreading, like a doctrine, like a religion. Patton's philosophy of command is creating a culture within Third Army that's fundamentally different from every other army in the European theatre. Commanders at every level are taking risks that doctrine says they shouldn't take, going places they shouldn't go, leading in ways that make conventional commanders uncomfortable. And Third Army keeps winning, keeps advancing, keeps achieving objectives faster than anyone predicted. Eisenhower sits in his office reading these reports. Bedell Smith stands beside him. The late afternoon sun streams through the windows. Outside, Reims is coming back to life. Cafes reopening, people in the streets, the normal rhythms of peace trying to reassert themselves, even while war still rages a few hundred miles east. He's creating an army in his own image, Smith says quietly. Every commander from corps down to company is learning to operate the way George operates. Lead from the front, share the risks, be visible.
It's becoming Third Army doctrine.
I know. That's dangerous, sir. Not just for George, for everyone. We can't run an army where colonels and majors think their job is to be in the assault wave, where generals think appropriate command distance is 100 yards from enemy positions. Eisenhower doesn't answer immediately. He's reading a statistical analysis prepared by his staff, comparing Third Army's performance to First Army's, to Seventh Army's, to Ninth Army's. The numbers tell a story. Third Army is moving faster, achieving objectives more quickly, but the casualty rates require careful interpretation, context, understanding. Brad called again this morning, Eisenhower says. Third time this week. He wants me to issue a direct order, restrict Patton to headquarters, limit his forward movement, make it clear that Army commanders command from Army headquarters, not from jeeps 3 miles behind the fighting. What did you tell him? I told him I'd think about it.
Smith knows what that means.
It means no. It means Eisenhower has already made his decision, and the decision is to let Patton continue being Patton, no matter the risk, no matter the cost. Sir, with respect, we need to consider what happens if we lose him, not if, when. Men who command like George don't survive wars. They take one risk too many. They push their luck one time past the breaking point. And then we lose the most effective army commander we have because he couldn't stay in a headquarters like a normal general. Eisenhower sets down the report, looks at Smith. Beetle, let me ask you something. If I order George to stay at headquarters, to command like Montgomery commands, from a distance with maps and radios and proper protocol, what happens to Third Army? Smith considers. Third Army continues to function. Eddie or Gay could step up if needed. The staff is competent. The units are good. That's not what I asked. I asked what happens to Third Army, not the units, not the organization, the spirit, the thing that makes those men advance faster and fight harder than anyone else. What happens to that? Smith is quiet. I'll tell you what happens, Eisenhower continues. It dies. Because that spirit exists, because George Patton has spent 2 years proving to every soldier in Third Army that their commanding general will go where he sends them, that he shares the danger, that rank doesn't exempt him from risk. You can't bottle that, Beetle. You can't preserve it by taking away the man who creates it. Then we're gambling everything on George's survival. No, we're gambling everything on whether we can win this war in the next few weeks, before George's luck runs out. And I think we can. Germany's finished. Everyone knows it. We're not talking about months of fighting. We're talking about days, maybe weeks. Can George survive that long? Can he? Eisenhower doesn't answer, because he doesn't know. Nobody knows. That's the gamble.
April 10th.
Another report. This one different. This one changes everything. Intelligence has been tracking Third Army's movements, the reconnaissance elements, the forward positioning, the direction of advance, and they've noticed something. Third Army isn't just advancing toward assigned objectives anymore. They're positioning for something bigger, something unauthorized. Berlin. According to multiple intelligence sources, Patton has been telling his staff that when Third Army takes Berlin, he's going to be there, not behind the lines, not at headquarters. I'm going to drive through the Brandenburg Gate personally, he allegedly told Major General Hobart Gay. The problem is simple. The political decision has already been made. The Soviets take Berlin. It was agreed at Yalta. Churchill argued against it, pushed hard for Allied forces to take Berlin first. But Roosevelt sided with Stalin. Berlin belongs to the Red Army. Eisenhower has already issued preliminary guidance. Ninth Army stops at the Elbe River. Doesn't advance on Berlin. Lets the Soviets have their prize. It's about post-war politics, about spheres of influence, about managing an alliance that's already showing cracks. But George Patton doesn't care about post-war politics. He cares about glory, about history, about one final charge into the enemy capital. And he's 60 years old, running out of time for that charge. Eisenhower sits at his desk that evening, alone. The intelligence report spread before him. Third Army reconnaissance elements are positioned in a way that suggests preparation for a major eastward push toward Berlin, toward the German capital, toward an objective that cannot be allowed. He drafts the order himself. Careful language, clear intent. Third Army will redirect south, will take objectives in Bavaria and Austria, will not advance on Berlin, will coordinate with Soviet forces approaching from the east, but will not enter the German capital. The order is specific, unambiguous, leaves no room for interpretation or creative compliance. April 11th. The order goes out through official channels, S, H, A, E, F, to 12th Army Group to 3rd Army. Clear chain of command, clear directive. April 12th. Omar Bradley calls. His voice is tight, controlled, barely. Ike, I've delivered the order personally. George understands. He's not happy, but he understands. How not happy? He called it the biggest mistake of the war, said we're handing glory to the Russians, said history will judge us for letting politics override military victory. He's probably right, Eisenhower says quietly. History probably will judge us for that. But the alternative is risking the alliance, risking post-war cooperation, risking a confrontation with Soviet forces in the streets of Berlin. I can't allow that, no matter what George thinks about glory. He's repositioning, Bradley says. Third Army recon is pulling back from the eastern approaches, redirecting south toward Bavaria. He's following orders, Ike. For once, he's actually following orders. Because he knows this is the line, Eisenhower says. This is where personal initiative ends and direct orders begin. Even George understands that. But something else is happening. Something that will change how both men understand George Patton's motivations. April 14th. Patton doesn't drive toward the objectives in Bavaria. Not immediately. Instead, he drives to Buchenwald, the concentration camp that 3rd Army units liberated 3 days earlier. 4th Armored Division found it on April 11th, while pursuing German forces retreating east. The initial reports were fragmentary. Horrifying, but fragmentary. Survivors, crematorium, evidence of mass murder. The division commander requested guidance on how to handle what they'd found. Patton decides to see it himself. He arrives not in a command car with full security detail, in a jeep, 2 aides, minimal escort. He walks through the camp, past the guard towers, past the barbed wire, into the barracks where skeletal figures in striped uniforms watch him with hollow eyes. Human beings reduced to walking skeletons, barely alive, barely human anymore. He sees the crematorium, the ovens where bodies were burned, the medical experimentation rooms, the warehouses full of belongings stripped from prisoners, shoes sorted by size, eyeglasses in neat piles, hair, human hair, bales of it, to be used for industrial purposes. And according to multiple accounts from soldiers present that day, George Patton, who'd seen combat on 4 continents, who'd led cavalry charges in Mexico and tank assaults across France and Germany, who everyone assumed was immune to shock, had to stop twice to compose himself. Twice he had to step away, turn his back, take a moment before he could continue. Staff Sergeant James Thompson, 4th Armored Division, later recorded in his diary, "Saw General Patton at the camp today. Never thought I'd see the old man shaken, but he was. Had to stop. Couldn't look for a minute. Then he came back. Made himself look. Made himself see it all." Patton walks the entire camp, every building, every section. He doesn't hurry, doesn't look away, forces himself to witness everything. Then he issues orders. Every unit within 50 miles will send representatives, officers and enlisted men. Every soldier will see this place, see what they've been fighting against. No exceptions. This isn't optional. This is required. But he insists on going first, walking through first, bearing witness first, before asking anyone else to see what he's seen. He tells Major General Hobart Gay afterward, his voice quiet and strained, "I've been shot at on 4 continents. I've led cavalry charges in Mexico, tank assaults in France and Germany. But walking through that camp was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I needed to do it first, before I asked anyone else to bear witness. Something changed in George Patton that day. The soldiers who saw him at Buchenwald reported it. The swagger was different, not diminished, transformed. There was a gravity to it now, a weight. He still visited forward positions over the following days, still climbed on tanks and walked where generals weren't supposed to walk. But there was a new purposefulness, as if bearing witness to humanity's worst evil had given him a different understanding of why he risked himself. Not for glory, for something more important. This gets back to Eisenhower. Through official reports, through the unofficial network of staff officers who talk to each other across headquarters, through aides who see things and quietly pass information up the chain, Eisenhower reads the accounts, studies them, and starts to understand something he hadn't fully grasped before. It isn't about glory. It isn't about headlines. It isn't about proving his toughness or his manhood or his courage. It's about something deeper, something more fundamental. Leadership as obligation, as burden, as the price you pay for having the authority to send men into danger. Eisenhower sits in his office that evening, alone. The reports spread across his desk, numbers and narratives, statistics and testimony. The accumulated evidence of 2 years watching George Patton command in ways that shouldn't work but somehow do. He thinks about Montgomery, careful, meticulous Montgomery, who plans everything down to the last detail, who never takes unnecessary risks, who commands from appropriate distance with proper protocol and achieves his objectives through systematic preparation and overwhelming force. Montgomery's methods are sound, proven, based on lessons learned in World War I, where improvisation meant death and preparation meant survival. Montgomery wins because he plans better, prepares more thoroughly, brings superior force to bear. But Montgomery also moves slowly, takes time, waits until everything is perfect before advancing. And that caution has costs that don't show up in casualty reports. Every day spent perfecting a plan is a day the enemy uses to prepare. Every pause for reorganization is a pause that lets the enemy recover. Every delay is time that prisoners in camps like Buchenwald remain imprisoned. Then he thinks about Patton. Reckless Patton. Unpredictable Patton. Patton who commands from jeeps and tank turrets and company command posts, who violates every principle of modern warfare. Both methods work, both have costs, both have benefits. The question isn't which is better. The question is, which does Eisenhower need right now, in April 1945, with Germany collapsing and the end in sight? He needs speed. He needs momentum. He needs an army that won't stop advancing until there's nothing left to advance against. He needs Patton. But there's still the problem of managing him, of keeping him alive long enough to see surrender, of preserving the weapon without destroying its edge. Eisenhower makes notes, thoughts about command philosophy, about the tension between protecting valuable commanders and allowing them the freedom to lead effectively, about the impossible balance between safety and effectiveness. These notes won't be shared, won't be official. They're for him, working through the problem, trying to understand how to command someone who doesn't believe in being commanded. The conclusion he reaches isn't comfortable, but it's honest. He can't change George Patton, can't make him safe, can't force him to command conventionally. Any attempt to do so will destroy what makes Patton effective, will kill the spirit that drives Third Army's success. So he won't try, won't issue orders that Patton will ignore or that will cripple his effectiveness, won't force the choice between obedience and results. He'll let George be George, with one exception. Berlin was the exception. That was the line, the one place where political necessity overrode military initiative. And Patton, miracle of miracles, accepted that line. For everything else, Eisenhower will trust, will hope, will accept the risk that one day the telegram will come saying George Patton has been killed doing something brave and unnecessary, because the alternative is losing Patton's effectiveness while keeping him alive, and that serves no one, not the army, not the war effort, not the prisoners still waiting in camps across Germany for liberation. Better to have Patton fully engaged and at risk than Patton safe and neutered. It's a cold calculation. A commander's calculation. The kind of decision that keeps supreme commanders awake at night. But it's the right decision. Eisenhower knows it, even if he doesn't like it. Outside, the spring evening settles over Reims. The war continues. Third Army pushes south now, following orders, but still pushing with the same relentless energy, the same refusal to pause or consolidate or give the enemy time to breathe. And George Patton, changed by what he saw at Buchenwald, but unchanged in his fundamental approach to command, leads them forward. 60 years old, heart condition, 3 stars, still proving that age and rank don't exempt you from sharing what you ask others to endure. Still keeping faith with soldiers who need to see their leader present, visible, willing to bear witness to the hardest things first. Still impossible, still irreplaceable, still Patton. April 18th, 1945. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, Reims, France. The war is clearly ending now. Anyone with eyes can see it. German resistance is collapsing across the entire front. Units surrendering en masse. Officers coming in under white flags asking for terms. The 1,000-year Reich is dying in weeks instead of decades. Berlin is encircled by Soviet forces. The thunder of Russian artillery can be heard 20 miles away. The Red Army is grinding through the city block by block, building by building, room by room. It's brutal, costly, exactly what Eisenhower wanted to avoid for American forces. Third Army has turned south as ordered, taking objectives in Bavaria and Austria, consolidating gains, preparing for occupation duties. The war for George Patton is becoming administrative, organizational, the kind of warfare he hates. The door to Eisenhower's office opens. No knock. Again. George Patton walks in. But he's different this time. No mud, no grin. He looks exhausted, older than his 60 years. There are lines in his face that weren't there a month ago. His eyes carry something new, something heavy. He's been touring the liberated camps, not just Buchenwald, Dachau, Ohrdruf, Mauthausen, walking through each one, bearing witness, then ordering his men to see what he's seen, to understand what they've been fighting against. Eisenhower gestures to a chair. Sit down, George. For once, Patton doesn't argue. He sits, heavily, like a man carrying weight that can't be measured in pounds. I heard about Buchenwald, Eisenhower says quietly. I heard you went personally, before sending your men. I had to see it, Ike. Patton's voice is rough, strained. Before I sent my men to see it, I had to know what I was asking them to witness. You didn't have to go first, George. You could have sent staff officers to assess the situation, then visited later with proper security, with preparation. Patton shakes his head. No, I couldn't. That's not how I command. I don't send men where I won't go. I never have. I never will, even when it's easier to stay back, especially when it's easier to stay back. Eisenhower studies him for a long moment. This isn't the same man who walked into his office covered in mud 3 weeks ago. That man was grinning, defiant, proud of his recklessness. This man is different, changed by what he's seen, by what bearing witness to humanity's worst evil has cost him. That's why you were in that tank at Oppenheim, Eisenhower says slowly. It wasn't about proving you're tough. It wasn't about glory or headlines or getting your name in the papers. It's about something else entirely. Patton meets his eyes. It's about showing them I'll share the risks. Always. Every time. That's the contract between a commander and his men, Ike. I'll ask you to do impossible things. I'll demand everything from you. I'll send you into fire and death and situations where good men don't survive. But I'll never, ever ask you to do something I wouldn't do myself. That's the only way leadership works for me. Even at 60 years old, Eisenhower says, even when you're too valuable to risk, even when you have a heart condition and a doctor who says you should avoid extreme physical stress. Especially then, Patton says firmly, because that's when it matters most, when you're the army commander, when you have the rank and the authority to stay safe, when everyone would understand if you commanded from headquarters like a normal general. That's when you have to prove you won't. That's when your soldiers need to see you're still with them, still willing to share what you ask them to endure. The room is quiet. Outside, Reims is preparing for victory. Celebrations are being planned, parades, ceremonies, the formal rituals of war's end.
But in this office, two men are having a conversation about something more fundamental than victory, about the nature of leadership itself, about what it means to command, to ask men to die, to bear the burden of sending soldiers into situations where some won't return. Eisenhower stands, walks to the window, looks out at the French countryside coming back to life. Spring is here now, fully arrived, trees budding, flowers blooming, the world renewing itself even as war still grinds forward a few hundred miles away. When he speaks, his voice is thoughtful, measured, the voice of a man who's made a decision and is finally ready to articulate it. George, you're the most infuriating officer I've ever commanded. You break rules, you ignore orders, you risk yourself unnecessarily. You make my life a living hell with your stunts and your insubordination and your complete disregard for conventional command wisdom. Patton starts to respond. Eisenhower holds up a hand. And you're absolutely right about all of it.
The words hang in the air. Patton stares. Bedell Smith, who's been standing quietly in the corner, looks up sharply. Eisenhower continues. Your men would follow you into hell because they absolutely know, you would lead the way. You'd be the first one through the gates. They've seen you do it. In Sicily, in Normandy, at the Rhine, at Buchenwald. Every time you ask them to do something hard, something dangerous, something that requires courage they're not sure they have, you've already done it. Already proven you'll share what you ask them to face. He turns from the window, looks directly at Patton. I can't order you to stop doing that, because if you stopped being you, you'd stop being the commander your army needs. Third Army doesn't work without George Patton leading from the front, without the general who refuses to stay safe, without the old man who climbs on tanks and walks through camps and stands where generals aren't supposed to stand. Take that away, and Third Army becomes just another army. Good units, competent officers, but not special, not extraordinary. Patton sits there, processing. This isn't what he expected. He came here prepared for another argument, another lecture about proper command protocol, another reminder that army commanders belong in headquarters. Instead, he's hearing something different, something he's never heard from Eisenhower before. Acceptance. So, I'm not going to order you to stay safe, Eisenhower says. I'm asking you, as a friend, as someone who's known you for 30 years, as someone who values you not just as a commander, but as a man. Try not to get killed before this is over, because I need you for what comes after. I need you to help us win the peace, and I need you alive to do it. Patton's voice is quiet when he responds, I'll try, Ike.
That's all I can promise. I'll try.
That's all I'm asking. They stand there, two old friends, two men who've commanded together through years of brutal warfare, who've argued and disagreed and driven each other crazy, but who understand each other in ways that don't require words. This moment represents something profound, a recognition that leadership isn't one size fits all, that what works for Eisenhower, commanding from supreme headquarters with maps and radios and political considerations, doesn't work for Patton. Can't work for Patton, because Patton's effectiveness comes from being present, from sharing danger, from proving, through personal example, that rank doesn't exempt him from the risks he asks others to take. Both approaches are valid, both are necessary. Eisenhower couldn't do what Patton does, Patton couldn't do what Eisenhower does. But together, they've created something remarkable, a partnership that's helped win a war.
Not despite their differences, but because of them.
Tell me about the camps, Eisenhower says after a moment. What you saw, what it was like. Patton is quiet for a long time. When he speaks, his voice carries emotion he rarely shows. It was worse than anything I've seen in 4 wars, Ike. And I've seen men die in every way you can imagine. I've seen what artillery does to human bodies, what machine guns do, what tanks do when they roll over positions. I thought I'd seen the worst of what humans can do to each other. He pauses, continues. But the camps are different. It's not the violence of battle. It's not heat-of-the-moment killing. It's systematic, organized, industrial. They built factories for death, bureaucracies for genocide. They kept records, took photographs, documented everything like it was normal administrative work. The survivors, he says, they're not even people anymore, not in the way we understand. They're skeletons with eyes, walking corpses.
And those eyes have seen things that no human should ever see. Things that can't be unseen, can't be forgotten. Eisenhower listens. He's read the reports, seen the photographs, but hearing it from George Patton, who's seen combat on 4 continents and isn't easily shocked, makes it more real somehow, more immediate. "I made my men go," Patton continues. "Every unit, every soldier. I ordered them to see, to witness, because they needed to understand what we've been fighting against, what this war has really been about. It's not about territory or politics or strategic objectives. It's about stopping this, about making sure this never happens again." "And you went first," Eisenhower says. "I went first, because that's the contract. That's what leadership means to me. I don't ask my men to bear burdens I won't bear first, even when the burden isn't bullets, even when it's something worse." This is the heart of it, the core of why George Patton commands the way he commands. It's not bravado, not machismo, not some death wish or need to prove his courage. It's a deeply held belief about the relationship between commanders and soldiers, about the obligations that come with rank, about what you owe the men who follow your orders into danger. "What happens now?" Patton asks, "after Germany surrenders? What happens to Third Army? To me?" Eisenhower returns to his desk, sits down. Occupation duty, rebuilding, denazification, the boring work of peace. And then, if you want it, Pacific Theater. Japan isn't finished. MacArthur could use experienced commanders. Patton's eyes light up slightly, the old fire returning. Armor operations in the Pacific? Probably not much use for tanks in the Philippines, Eisenhower admits. But there will be a mainland invasion eventually. Japan proper. That's tank country. That's where Third Army's methods would work. How long? Months, maybe a year. We need to finish Germany first, secure Europe, then shift focus west. But yes, George, there's more war for you if you want it, more chances to lead, to prove that what you believe about command still matters. Patton nods slowly. Then, "And if I don't survive that long? If the luck runs out before we finish?" Eisenhower meets his eyes. "Then you'll die doing what you believe is right, leading from the front, sharing the risks, keeping the contract with your men. And Third Army will remember you forever, the general who wouldn't stay safe, who proved that leadership means being present, who changed how we think about command." That's not much comfort. No, Eisenhower agrees, it's not, but it's honest. And I think you'd rather have honesty than comfort. They sit in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling, 2 men discussing mortality and legacy and the price of principle. Then Patton stands, straightens his uniform. The exhaustion is still there, but there's something else now too. Resolve, purpose, the determination that's carried him through 4 decades of military service. "I should get back to headquarters," he says. "We're coordinating with 7th Army on the southern objectives, making sure nothing falls through the gaps as the Germans collapse." "George," Eisenhower says as Patton reaches the door. "Thank you." Patton turns. "For what?" "For being you, for refusing to be anything other than what you are, for proving that there's more than one way to win a war, for showing me that sometimes the rule book is wrong." Patton nods, a slight smile. Not the wide grin from 3 weeks ago. Something more subdued, more genuine. "Try not to get killed, Ike. The peace is going to be harder than the war. You'll need to be around for it." Then he's gone. The door closes. Eisenhower sits alone in his office. Bedell Smith emerges from the corner where he's been quietly observing. "That was quite a conversation, sir." "Yes. Do you think he'll make it through the next few weeks until surrender?" Eisenhower doesn't answer immediately. He's thinking about all the reports, all the incidents, all the times Patton has put himself at risk, all the times luck could have failed, all the moments where a slightly different decision, a slightly different circumstance, could have resulted in a telegram saying, "General George S. Patton, killed in action." "I don't know, Beetle. I honestly don't know. But I know this. If we lose George Patton, we lose him doing what he believes is right, living up to his principles, keeping faith with his soldiers. And there are worse ways for a soldier to die. But better ways to survive. Yes, much better ways to survive." The weeks that follow are a blur of advance and surrender. German units coming in by the thousands, officers asking for terms, soldiers laying down arms, the machinery of the Third Reich grinding to a halt. Third Army keeps moving, Bavaria, Austria, Czechoslovakia, liberating camps, freeing prisoners, accepting surrenders. The work is constant, exhausting, but necessary. And George Patton is there, not safe in headquarters, out with his units, seeing the results of their advance, witnessing the liberation of camps, talking to survivors, making sure his soldiers understand what they've accomplished. May 7th, 1945. Germany surrenders unconditionally. The war in Europe is over. Allied forces have achieved total victory. The Third Reich is destroyed. Hitler is dead. The nightmare is finished. May 8th, Victory in Europe Day. Celebrations across the Allied world, parades, ceremonies, joy and relief and exhaustion all mixed together. Eisenhower attends the formal ceremonies, accepts congratulations, gives speeches, does the work that supreme commanders do when wars end. And he thinks about George Patton, who survived, who made it through the war alive, despite taking risks that should have killed him a dozen times over, who proved that sometimes luck favors the bold, or the reckless, or the impossible. Third Army's final statistics tell the story. From becoming operational in August 1944 to Germany's surrender in May 1945, 9 months of continuous combat operations. They advanced further and faster than any other Allied army in the European theatre, liberated or captured over 81,000 square miles of territory, freed hundreds of thousands of prisoners from camps and forced labor, captured over 950,000 enemy soldiers, inflicted casualties estimated at over 500,000 enemy killed or wounded. Third Army's own casualties were real, over 160,000 total casualties, including 21,000 killed in action. Each one, a life ended, a family destroyed, a future erased. But the casualty rate relative to objectives achieved was lower than conventional operations, lower than careful, methodical advances. Patton's methods, as reckless as they appeared, actually saved lives by ending battles faster, by maintaining momentum, by not giving the enemy time to prepare stronger defenses. Speed saved lives. Audacity saved lives. The willingness to take calculated risks saved lives. The numbers proved it. History would study them for generations. But numbers don't capture everything, don't capture the spirit, the belief, the loyalty that Patton created in his army. Eisenhower knows this, has always known it. That's why he let George be George, why he accepted the risk, why he trusted that the man who commanded from jeeps and tanks would survive long enough to see victory. And he did, against all odds. Against all predictions, George Patton survived. The occupation period begins. Third Army transitions from combat operations to military government, administering conquered territory, processing prisoners, beginning denazification, the boring, necessary work of peace. Patton hates it. He's not built for occupation duty, not suited for administration and politics and diplomatic considerations. He's a warrior, not a bureaucrat. Tensions develop, disagreements about denazification policy, about how to handle former Nazi Party members, about reconstruction priorities. Patton's approach is pragmatic. Eisenhower's is political. They clash. But that's a different story, a different chapter. The war story is finished. The war story ends with George Patton surviving, with Third Army achieving victory, with two old friends finally understanding each other, finally accepting their differences, finally recognizing that both approaches to command were necessary, both valid,
both essential to winning.
December 9th, 1945. 7 months after victory. Mannheim, Germany. George Patton is going hunting. Pheasant hunting. A day off from occupation duties. A chance to do something normal, something peaceful, something that doesn't involve military government or denazification or political considerations. He's in a staff car, driven by a private, heading to the hunting grounds outside Mannheim. It's a routine trip, safe, no combat, no danger, just a drive through occupied Germany on a quiet December morning. The roads are icy, visibility is poor. An American truck pulls out unexpectedly. The driver doesn't see the staff car, doesn't have time to stop. The collision isn't severe, not by combat standards. No fire, no explosion. Just two vehicles hitting at low speed on a slippery road. But George Patton is thrown forward. His head strikes something, metal, glass, something hard enough to cause damage, severe damage, spinal damage. He's conscious, knows immediately something is wrong. Can't move, can't feel his legs, knows what this means. "This is a hell of a way to die," he says to the private. His voice is calm, almost resigned, as if he's observing something happening to someone else. They get him to a hospital, military hospital in Heidelberg. Doctors work on him. Spinal injury, severe, paralysis from the neck down. The prognosis is uncertain. Maybe he'll improve, maybe he won't. Time will tell. But time doesn't tell, doesn't give him a chance. December 21st, 1945. George S. Patton dies, age 60, not in combat, not leading a charge, not in a tank under fire, in a hospital bed, from complications of injuries sustained in a car accident, the way no one who knew him expected him to go. The irony is brutal. Survived 4 continents of combat, survived cavalry charges and tank assaults and artillery barrages, survived leading from the front for 40 years, survived the Rhine crossing at age 60, survived the war, and died in a car accident during peacetime. Routine drive, no heroics, no glory, just bad luck on an icy road. The funeral is held in Luxembourg, December 24th, Christmas Eve. Hundreds of Third Army soldiers attend, tank commanders, infantry privates, artillery officers, the men who served under him, who followed him across Europe, who believed in him. They come to pay respects to the general who led them, who was there with them, who proved over and over that rank didn't exempt him from danger. Technical Sergeant Michael Russo, 4th Armoured Division, who crossed the Rhine in the same company as Patton on March 23rd. He would have led us anywhere, to Berlin, to Tokyo, to hell itself, because we knew, absolutely knew, he'd be in front, he'd go first. That's why we followed him. Lieutenant Colonel David Harrison, 11th Armoured Division. General Patton taught us that leadership isn't about staying safe, it's about being present, about sharing what you ask others to endure. I'll carry that lesson for the rest of my life. Captain Robert Chen, Captain Robert Mitchell, 3rd Infantry Division. I saw him at Buchenwald, saw what it cost him to walk through that camp. He didn't have to be there, didn't have to see it before ordering us to see it, but he did, because that's who he was. That's what he believed leadership required. The testimonies continue, story after story, all variations on the same theme. Patton led from the front, shared the risks, kept faith with his soldiers, proved that leadership means being present. They bury him in Luxembourg American Cemetery, among the soldiers who died in the Battle of the Bulge, among the men who fought in Third Army's operations. He'd requested it, wanted to be buried with his men, not in some separate place reserved for generals, even in death, keeping the contract. 1948, Dwight Eisenhower publishes his memoir, Crusade in Europe, the story of the war from his perspective as Supreme Commander. Strategic decisions, political considerations, the challenge of managing personalities and egos and national interests while fighting a war. He writes about many commanders, Montgomery, Bradley, Devers. Each gets their assessment, their place in history, but the section on George Patton is different, more personal, more reflective. Patton was the most brilliant field commander of armor in World War II. He was also the most difficult subordinate I ever had.
He could not stay in headquarters, could not command from safety. He needed to be where the fighting was, regardless of his rank or age or the objections of his staff. I spent half the war worried he'd be killed doing something courageous and unnecessary, but his soldiers would have followed him anywhere because they knew, absolutely knew, he'd lead them there. That kind of loyalty can't be manufactured, can't be taught.
It has to be earned through personal example, through shared sacrifice, through proving, day after day, that you'll share what you ask others to endure. George Patton earned that loyalty every single day. At age 60, climbing into tanks, walking through concentration camps before asking his soldiers to witness them, visiting aid stations under fire, standing on unfinished bridges, going first, always going first. His methods violated every principle of modern command, every lesson we'd learned about appropriate distances and command safety. But they worked. Third Army's advance across Europe was the fastest, most effective sustained offensive in the war. And it happened because George Patton refused to command from safety. That's worth more than all the tactical doctrines ever written. The verdict from the Supreme Commander who tried to protect him, who argued with him, who worried about him, who finally accepted him. George Patton was right, about leadership, about command, about what soldiers need to see in their leaders. He was right, and history knows it. 80 years later, military academies still study Third Army's advance across Europe, still analyze Patton's methods, still debate whether his approach to command was brilliant or reckless. The debate misses the point. It wasn't one or the other, it was both. Brilliant and reckless, effective and dangerous, exactly what was needed when it was needed. Eisenhower understood this by April 1945, understood that you can't separate Patton's effectiveness from his methods, can't make him safe without making him ordinary, can't preserve the weapon without accepting the risk. The mud on Patton's uniform that day in March, walking into Eisenhower's office fresh from the Rhine crossing, wasn't just dirt. It was proof, evidence, physical manifestation of a philosophy of leadership that transcends tactics and doctrine. Leadership as personal commitment, as shared sacrifice, as the willingness to go first into danger and hardship and horror, as keeping faith with the people who follow your orders into situations where some won't return. That's the contract George Patton lived by, the contract he kept for 40 years of military service, the contract that made Third Army soldiers believe they could do the impossible because their general proved he'd be there doing the impossible with them. That contract didn't end when the war ended, didn't end when Patton died. It endures in every commander who understands that leadership isn't about rank or distance or safety. It's about presence, about being there, about sharing. The soldiers who served under Patton carried that lesson for the rest of their lives, taught it to the next generation, who taught it to the generation after that. 80 years later, we're still talking about the general who refused to command from safety, still studying his methods, still trying to understand how one 60-year-old man with a heart condition could inspire an entire army to achieve the impossible. The answer is simple and profound. He kept the contract. He went first. Every single time. Into tanks under fire, into liberated camps before his soldiers, into danger and horror and hardship. Proving that rank doesn't exempt you from sharing what you ask others to endure. That's George Patton's legacy. Not the statistics, not the territory captured, not the battles won, the contract. The idea that leadership requires personal commitment, personal sacrifice, personal presence, that you can't ask people to do what you won't do yourself, that going first isn't optional, it's essential. Some contracts, once made, are written in mud and blood and memory, and they never fade.